looking at a comparison of these different types of cells that we've seen with regard to their electric potential. If we look at a resting potential, skeletal muscle cells have a resting potential -7. Cardiac muscle cells, the contractile cells, have a resting potential of -9. Autorhythmic cells, however, have these unstable potentials due to that IF channel that kind of starts at -60 but never stays at -60. It's a very transient thing. If we look at what leads to threshold, we have a net sodium entry. Remember, we had the acetylcholine nicotinic channels where you have more sodium coming in and potassium coming out. That'll depolarize you to threshold. Here in the contractile myocardium, that initial, if you look at where does the initial action potential comes from, it just comes from an adjacent cell. Right? Gap junctions allow for action potential to spread. On the other hand, here we have these IF channels where, similar to skeletal muscles, we have this net sodium influx through the IF channel that will lead to this calcium influx. So the rising phase of the action potential in myocardial autorhythmic cells is due to this calcium influx. So this initial depolarization, rapid depolarization here is due to calcium. Repolarization, again, potassium efflux for all of them. Hyperpolarization, normally in autorhythmic cells and contractile myocardial cells, you never really get hyperpolarization because you just don't have enough time to do that for that. The duration of the action potentials, real short for skeletal, real long for both autorhythmic and contractile cells, again due to this calcium influx that has to be removed. And with regard to refractory periods, irrelevant in autorhythmic cells really, but in skeletal muscles it's a very brief refractory period, so you can get summation, right? You can get tetany, you can get fatigue. In contractile cells, however, because of that extended calcium plateau, we never reach tetany. You never reach tetany, you never reach fatigue. So these cells are fatigue resistant, okay, as a result. Now collectively, the actions of these together give us this cardiac output, this blood flowing out through the body. And when we looked at our general expression again here, right? I'll abbreviate it like that. Okay, we were looking at blood flow being due to a blood pressure gradient and resistance. Now, over the entire body, what determines blood flow is your cardiac output. Okay? So cardiac output, if you don't have cardiac output, you're not going to have blood flow. More cardiac output, more blood flow, right? So this is a function of the heart. This is out in the arteries, but cardiac output determines flow out in the arteries. So we could put cardiac output in replace for flow there, and we get an expression like this, okay, here. And if we rearrange this, you okay with that? For blood pressure, this is what we get. So, really what's ultimately important for your body's tissues is that there is adequate blood pressure out in the body's tissues. And in response to adequate blood pressure, you will get exchange at capillaries. Does that kind of make sense? Mm-hmm. If you had no blood pressure or insufficient blood pressure, you're going to have insufficient exchange at capillaries. We also know that there are health consequences if blood pressure is too high. Okay. So blood pressure here is really a function of your cardiac output and your resistance. Your cardiac output is a function of what two things? Stroke volume and heart rate. And we already saw stroke volume, preload, contractility, afterload, heart rate, sympathetic, parasympathetic stimulation will affect your heart rate. And resistance, for the most part, is really just affected by vessel diameter. Vasoconstriction, blood pressure goes up. Vasodilation, blood pressure goes down. So this is where we are kind of. Is now we're looking at what happens to, if you look at the body and the whole purpose of having this discussion about cardiac output and contractile cells versus autorhythmic was to set the stage of establishing this pressure gradient. And if you didn't have this pressure gradient, you couldn't have exchange, you couldn't have blood flowing, and we needed to do that. So now we're ready to take a look on a larger scale and look at what happens out in the body to allow for capillary exchange and then the maintenance of this blood pressure to facilitate capillary exchange. Seem all right? All right, so this is a good little place to take a little break. Let's take a little break since I'm ready to shift gears a little bit and talk about pressure. Got some papers I want to hand out and give back to you, and then we'll start talking about blood pressure. Seem all right?